The rollout was intended to start carefully, to continue to grow and to continue to grow. That's the big story of what's happening in Australia, the confidence, the security, the next step.
This week has marked a significant turning point in the medical and economic evolution of the coronavirus pandemic. The vaccine rollout on which the Morrison government is relying to restore our lives and the economy has begun. The government has also finally made a much criticised decision about new rates of welfare payments, which will see more than 3 million people plunged further below the poverty line at the end of next month and facing tough new obligations to look for work. The vaccine gives the government optimism about the economy, and axing the COVID welfare supplement reflects that optimism. The government is gambling strong jobs growth will rescue many voters who found themselves needing help for the first time from being pushed into poverty. It hasn't said yet what will happen to the JobKeeper wage subsidy. Treasury estimates there will still be 1.1 million people in the scheme in the March quarter as it draws to a close. In a speech in Canberra yesterday, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg indicated it's likely to be replaced by schemes targeting parts of the economy still hit hardest by the pandemic.
Cafes and restaurants, travel agencies and tour arrangement services, accommodation and air and space transport. And it is the CBDs that have been affected by COVID to a far greater extent than suburban and most regional businesses.
This is, of course, not the first major economic crisis to hit the Australian economy. There have been recessions and depressions, world wars and reconstruction. Professor Ross Garnaut has contemplated some of these and what change in economic thinking they demanded. He lists Australia's response to the Great Depression and the task of reconstruction after the Second World War as two of the success stories.
The reforms of 83 onwards till the rest of the century gave us the longest period of economic expansion any country's ever had.
So what were the keys to the success in those periods when things did change for the better?
In all cases, you had to have political leaders who were able to articulate the extent of the challenge. You had to have good economists, you had to have public education, and the successful programs all had at their centre a commitment to fairness. And unless the community feels that the benefits of getting things right are going to be fared equitably, you won't get community cooperation.
In a new book, Reset, Garnaut has set out some ideas about what we now have to do to deal with a very different challenge ahead. He doesn't sing from the usual reform song sheet, the humdrum tune of GST, personal tax cuts and cuts in budget spending. For starters, his recipe starts with monetary policy, that is, interest rates, and he compares what happened in Australia and the US to illustrate his point. The US suffered a deep recession after the GFC, while Australia didn't, with government spending keeping the economy ticking over and unemployment low. But that good outcome was ultimately defeated because our high interest rates pushed up our dollar, making the economy uncompetitive. This meant that by 2019, unemployment in Australia had not moved much, while unemployment in the US had fallen dramatically.
Running tighter monetary policy than the rest of the world gave us a stronger exchange rate, and it created big constraints on growth on investment and output in our export industries. At the end of the period, we had by far the smallest manufacturing sectors of all developed countries. We can't go back to that.
Tax policy also has a role to play, the economist says, but he's not raising the usual suspects of changes to the GST and lower company tax. Instead, he's pushing for a radical change in the company tax base and changes in the personal income tax system, which would effectively mean the end of welfare payments as we know them, replaced by the idea of negative income taxes for lower income earners.
We've got to have a new discussion if we're going to come out of this recession well.
Instead of benefiting from the tailwind of expanding trade with China, he says, this time we will be facing international headwinds.
You can boost up domestic demand and boost up housing. That's easy. But we've had very little investment in trade-exposed industries, export industries, and that's where we've got to get a lot of the growth if we're going to have sustainable full employment and return to rising incomes.
And just as the international trading environment is changing, so are the demands for our resources.
Many of the historic paths to export growth are blocked. We're actually going to get a contraction in exports of coal, and that's a big export, and probably no growth in LNG because of climate change concerns. We've got the lowest energy costs in a zero emissions world, and it becomes an advantage in processing Australian minerals. That can become a huge industry. We've also got big advantages in our huge areas of land for capturing carbon in plants, in the soil, exporting carbon credits, growing biomass for industry, because we won't be making plastics and petrochemicals out of oil, gas and coal. We'll be making them out of biomass. And if we get our act together, we can do that more cheaply than others.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.